so welcome everybody to another episode of Bones and Stones. We've got something interesting today. We've got a new segment which we are calling Ask an Archaeologist. And this has been brought about by my cousin, actually, who sent us some images of an interesting structure that he located in the Karoo, but we'll get into that in a bit. So what we thought we'd do today is to have a look at these images that my cousin has sent through. And then, then between the three of us, try and work out exactly what we think the structure is. Now, just as a disclaimer, before we get into the actual description of this feature, Tim, myself, and Matt have specific research areas. So this structure seems to be a little bit beyond our areas of expertise, but we're going to take a stab at it and see what we can conclude in terms of what we think the structure is. So my cousin William, Lotta, thanks very much for sending through the images. So just the images should pop up now, so I'll just go through them in terms of what the actual structure is. So it's a roughly 5 foot long structure. You can see it's a stone walled structure. You can see that the rocks are quite flat and they've been stacked on top of each other in a very specific way. And it seems as if the structure has actually fallen into itself. There are two larger upright erect stones towards the one end. I think it's the right of the image. And my cousin William said that there was almost like a binding matrix between the actual rocks. It was like a sandy, cement-like binding matrix between the rocks, which is quite interesting. In terms of where they found it on the eastern side of the Cederberg Mountains in the Tankwa Karoo area, along the banks of the Durang River. Now, I know my cousin was there specifically, for fishing. So thanks very much for the invite, by the way, William. I'm very sad that I wasn't with you on this actual trip, but irrespective of whether you were hiking, whether you were fishing, it's obviously a really exciting thing that you guys have located and stuff. So we thought, we'd do a little bit of a video today and just try and throw some ideas around in terms of what we think it is. So just to get into my initial thoughts on this feature. So William, to use his direct terms, you thought it was possibly a grave, okay, and possibly associated with some of the other archaeology in that area. There is a lot of archaeology in that area. There is a sand, bushman, hunter-gatherer, rock art that's known of in that area as well as structures. I had the opportunity of doing some work in that area a couple of years ago, about 50 kilometers to the south. And I'm just drawing on from that experience in terms of what we located in that landscape, which is a very similar landscape, and try and put forward some ideas. So when I first saw the image, I thought, okay, it could possibly be a grave, but the rocks seem like they're stacked in a very unusual way. And what also threw it for me in terms of it not being a grave is that it seemed like there were two entrance stones. So for me, with the structure having two entrance stones, it didn't come across as being like a normal grave, also because graves generally tend to be much lower. This structure seems like it's quite built up, and it's subsequently collapsed in on itself. And graves generally tend to be quite elongated as well. So overall, the structure of it just didn't come across as too much of being like a grave. Another possible thing is maybe a landscape marker. We've all been in the field together before, and we've seen landscape markers of various shapes and sizes and stuff. So I thought possibly a landscape marker as well, maybe indicating a historic farm boundary or some kind of territory. But again, the fact that it had two entrance stones just kind of threw it off for me there. I didn't think that was the case. Then maybe a small kraal. But again, it was stacked really hard to be a small kraal. Yes, the two entrance stones could maybe talk to something coming in or out. But again, the walling structure just didn't seem like the normal double-coursed infilled walling that you'd see elsewhere in the country. And then maybe something else like a hunting blind. My initial thought was some kind of hunting blind with a very small entrance where you could then enter in and then conceal yourself within the landscape. It could then possibly have had a little viewing window from which to spot game. You can't see any of those features or any kind of window features in the walling currently. So I wasn't too sure about that. And then in terms of chronology, I thought it was definitely recent or historic, just purely based off the preservation of the walling, the organization of the walling as well. It's very, very, very organized and very well preserved. And when you mentioned that there was some kind of matrix between the cobbles or the rocks, I thought that if we're dealing with something very old, generally that matrix wouldn't preserve. Those are at least my initial thoughts. And you can see that the surrounding geology has had a big impact on the actual structure itself, given the shape of the actual rocks. Within that area, there's a lot of Table Mountain sandstone, and it looks like they've taken those fragments and then stacked them up together. It's very much a reflection of the local geology, the characteristics of the local boulders on the landscape. But Tim, let me hand over to you to get your initial thoughts on what you thought the structure was.
Yeah, when you sent me the image, because the first picture I looked at had no scale or anything like that, I was really confused. It looked like a structure of some kind. I never thought grave. It never crossed my mind that it could be a grave because of the shape. And then you had already mentioned the like entrance stone, so I had noticed that, and also it didn't look grave-like. So my first thought was it was potentially some kind of structure. When I saw the scale and the size, I thought, no way, this is way too small for people to use or anything like that. And then what threw me off a little bit was that matrix on the inside between the rocks. And I mentioned to you that I thought maybe it could be part of initiation ceremony, where there's a fire and certain elements of the initiation ceremony are discarded onto this hearth, which is covered in ash and then often covered with rocks. And I've seen those before in the field, but they didn't look like this, so I wasn't sure. Now that I think about it, when I was younger, when I was doing undergrad, and I was in Namibia with my parents and we were camping, they all went for a snooze, and I decided to go walking up a hill. And on this hill, I found something actually very similar. It never clicked until just now, actually. Found something very similar, also with an entrance, but it was completely collapsed in though. So but it was clearly intentionally placed. So maybe something similar, but honestly, in terms of function and use, I had absolutely no idea. In Lesotho, we saw circular structures, not with like a roof that would collapse in, but that apparently kids had built to play with. But yeah, I was stumped.
Yeah. So, Kara, what were your thoughts?
So I'll just like to put it out there that if we're not looking at an Acheulean hand axe, I don't know what anything is in the archaeological record at all, which I think most of my colleagues can attest to.
That extends
I'm going to go
archaeology as well.
Right. Yeah, and in my general life, I know what a TV is and a hand axe, but I can't tell you much more. I'm going to go the devil's advocate route. I think that this is natural. I think this guy, being Lauder's family member as well, is probably maybe untrustworthy. I don't know. In any case, we've had an interesting debate about Lauder's last name and his potential sort of background as a family of thieves, which is the next topic of my novel. In any case, I think that this is a natural geological formation. I think what's happened is this is sort of like some sort of shale outcrop that has been vertically turned, and so the sort of like fracture planes are on the top of the surface pointing straight up. And this is and this is a new geological term I'm introducing. It's called onioning. It's like an onion blossom that has started to fold out from all these cracks. And the matrix inside is because there's a plant growing through it. So the plant, in growing on this particular rock, has sucked up some of that soil underneath. And this is essentially a desert onion.
Kara, I think the correct geological term is actually exfoliation, just by the way. And I hope none of your Cradle funders are watching this video, because I think they would start doubting your ability to interpret the geology in the Cradle.
Exfoliate is what I do to my face when I'm in the shower with my expensive creams and soaps. So,
but maybe,
anyways.
Sorry, Kara, just to add to what you've been saying, maybe we also just need to look at how it aligns with the stars and the equinox as well, because that could also play a big role in its interpretation.
A subject of another video for sure, but it's a very good point.
Okay, so I think it's now time to bring on somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. So the three of us have we've called on a colleague who has worked in the area and we think knows what he's talking about. So I think, Tim, without further ado, do you want to admit Nic Zachariou, who's currently a postdoc at the University of Pretoria, living in Nana?
I'll admit some things about him, but maybe that's not video appropriate.
There we go. Hey, Nic.
How's it?
How you doing?
Great. Good, good and you, man?
Good, good, good.
Lekker.
Thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
I was just busy introducing you again. This is now your third time. We're going to have to start rolling out the red carpet for you on.
I'm going to start charging soon, actually. is
Fourth
what's gonna
time.
happen.
It's fourth time if you include derelict.
The fourth time. Jeez,
Oh,
okay,
fourth,
fourth time.
Yeah,
So,
fourth time.
yeah, so just telling the viewers that you are a postdoc currently at Tux University in Pretoria, formerly at UCT. And, you know, we thought we'd bring you on and stuff because this seems like it's right up your alley in terms of your research interests and stuff.
Right.
And out of all of us, you know what you're talking about, because the rest of us, we've been spitballing for the last 10 minutes about what we think it is. So we're now very anxious to hear what it actually is.
Okay, cool. So it actually is. Can I ask what you guys thought it was?
Big picture,
Okay,
yeah.
go for Tim.
Well, we've got Lotte thought it was an alien platform for their spaceships. Kara thought it was onioning, which is it's just like a Shrek-like process, and I thought that it was aligned with equinoxes and star portal systems and things like that. So basically, your standard
Okay.
approach, the kind of thing you'd think it was if you saw it offhand, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you guys are on the right track.
Yeah. No, we discussed. We thought maybe graves, or if it was Matt thought maybe a hunting blind at some stage. What else were we saying? Yeah.
Landscape, perhaps.
Landscape,
some kind of really
yeah.
doesn't seem practical. Yeah, I think for me the closest thing would be some kind of hunting blind. Not that you can see a little window to look out of, but something along those lines with the small entrance as well.
Okay, so I can see you guys are like on the edges of your seats here. So no, so actually what it is, it's a leopard trap, or
Cool.
some sort of trap for a leopard, a jackal, rooikat, any kind of carnivore that would prey on your stock. And so they're dotted all over kind of semi-desert areas in the country. I'm not so sure about like Highveld or up in like along the coastal areas, but I know that there are a dime a dozen all over the interior and also kind of up the west coast into Namaqualand. And they were set up basically to trap an individual leopard or hyena. There was a little bit of food put in there, which was attached to a peg. They would go in, they would pull the food, the peg would release a slab that was sitting on top that would then cover the entrance. So the entrance is quite small and quite narrow, so that the stone that would fall over wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to get a really big ass heavy one to set it up. And then there'd be a little gap kind of on the top where either you would spear the animal or you'd shoot down with your rifle to kill it. And so they're normally around 2 meters or so, and the ones that we see a lot obviously are collapsed now. So if it's the image that I think you were talking about, you can kind of see that the top's kind of caved in a little bit.
That's amazing. Geez, I wouldn't have thought that. So just, I see Tim's got a question for you, but maybe just to ask one quickly, in terms of chronology then, how far back in time do we see these structures, and then how recently?
So there actually isn't a lot on them. The general rule of thumb up until very recently, so you find them very much in the Middle East, as well as in Southern Africa. So Arabian Peninsula, there's a lot, Israel, Yemen, Saudi Arabia. And there they thought they were quite recent because people were still using them to trap leopards, and then they would sell them on to zoos. And then someone did some OSL dating, and some of the ones they dated to the 4th millennium BC.
Wow.
So they're old. I'm not saying the ones here are the same, but the general thought here is that in Southern Africa they're colonial, although there is some suggestion that they are from before. I think one of the travelers said that he describes one that he sees in the interior, and he says it goes to, it might belong to pastoral Khoi groups as well. So there's some suggestion that it might actually be pre-colonial.
So other than that mention of pastoral Khoi groups, what are we looking at? Possibly European settlers using them as well as as well as, so there could actually be quite a different group of people using this system to capture these creatures.
Yeah, it could be. So I think it's, like having reading about this now and thinking about it more, I realize there hasn't been anything done on it. So that kind of question you've asked now, Tim, that's super relevant and super pertinent now, because it's another example too of a technology that we've seen spring up independently somewhere else in the Arabian Peninsula in this instance, that's turning up here, and it is such a kind of mundane item or mundane feature for a settler or a farmer in the interior with all their sheep. Such like a mundane thing that there hasn't been much thought about it. So it's quite interesting now. I've bit the bug now. I'm like, ooh, I must write something about this.
It's really interesting because it's almost like, you know, the structures are built on the landscape, and once the infrastructure is there, it can then be used. As you say, Tim, there could be multiple groups using these structures through time, presumably. And even if they have then collapsed, they can be rebuilt and then repurposed and stuff. So it really is incredibly interesting. But I think we're coming up on time now. So Nic, I mean, thanks very much for coming and giving us some clarity on this whole structure and stuff. And William, I hope you enjoyed the video and stuff. And I hope this answers your questions. Thanks very much for obviously sending us the images. It was really quite cool to learn about something new, something beyond our normal areas of research. So yeah, Kara, Tim and myself have definitely learned something today. And Nic, thanks for coming on and explaining it. It was really great.
Thanks, guys.